Hey guys, today I am reacting to the Éirinn Curtain, A History of the Irish Border. So let's get into it.
Today you can cross from Ireland, an independent country, into Northern Ireland, a part of the UK, without even noticing it. Just going from Clonus, Ireland to Clover Hill, Ireland will bring you across an international border 4 times. Today the border between the UK and Ireland is invisible. In the past, not so much. There used to be barbed wire, soldiers and checkpoints along this 500-kilometre border. Bombs, bodies and balaclavas were common sights, and this squiggly line on the map caused 30 years of sectarian violence. But why is there a border here? Why is such a tiny island split in two? And why did a border make women hide butter in their underpants? Well, let's find out. But before that, let's talk about another border. The border between you and your data. A border that Backblaze can $6 and hundreds function to. Or I drop my laptop. Or with Backblaze, you'll need data files. And it helps. Before we can cover what the Irish border is, we'll need to do a very brief overview of Ireland and Britain's, let's say, complicated
That's important.
history. Between the 16th and 17th centuries, land was taken from Irish lords and given to English and Scottish colonists. These were known as plantations. The plantation of Ulster, the furthest north of Ireland's 4 provinces, was extremely successful for the British. Relations between the Irish and the colonists weren't exactly friendly. The Catholic Irish and the Protestant British essentially saw each other as Satan. As more and more Irish were pushed off their land, tensions reached a breaking point. On the 23rd of October, 1641, the Ulster Catholics rebelled. 4,000 British colonists were killed, and decades of war between Irish, Scottish and English armies followed. Soldiers, civilians, kings and clergy all fought and died across Britain and Ireland as Catholics and Protestants fought for supremacy. The Protestants eventually won out. At the Siege of Derry and the Battle of the Boyne, the Protestant William of Orange defeated the Catholic King James II, thus making himself king of these islands and establishing Protestant supremacy. These events established a Protestant majority in Ulster and created historical resentment between Irish Catholics and Protestants. In 1800, the United Kingdom of Great Britain became the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. Being a full member of the UK did not, however, help Ireland when potato blight struck. Between 1845 and 1849, the Irish had nothing to eat. The British ruling classes continued to export desperately needed food for profit.
Exactly, and that's what's really messed up. And during World War II, the British did something similar to Bengal in India.
And little help was provided. The famine was blamed on the Irish themselves. At the time, Sir Charles Trevelyan wrote, "The real evil with which we have to contend is not the physical evil of the famine, but the moral evil of the selfish, perverse and turbulent character of the Irish people." Over 1 million people
That's fucked up.
died, while 1 million more left the country as refugees. The population of the island has yet to recover. Now, I'm not just listing off bad things to make you feel sad or angry. The horror of the famine reignited revolutionary spirits in Ireland, spirits that had been crushed since 1798. The famine led to the wars for Irish independence and thus the border. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, a new political wave washed across Ireland. A push was being made for home rule. This meant that Ireland would get its own parliament within the United Kingdom that would manage Irish affairs. This did not go over well with Protestants, who did not want to become a minority in a self-governed Ireland. Protestants made up less than 10% of the population in the south of Ireland, but in Ulster they were 56% of the population. By 1912, the Home Rule Party had formed a tight alliance with the current ruling British Liberal Party. Against them stood the Conservatives and the Ulster Unionists. A unionist is someone that wants to preserve Ireland's union with the United Kingdom. This contrasts Irish nationalists that want an independent, united Irish nation. Unionists were almost always Protestant, while nationalists were almost always Catholic. The third Home Rule Bill was introduced to Parliament in 1912, but few could have imagined how fiercely the Ulster Unionists would resist this. The Ulster Covenant, an agreement with God, was signed on the 28th of September 1912.
Interesting.
471,414 Unionists declared that they would, using all means which may be found necessary to defeat the present conspiracy to set up a Home Rule Parliament in Ireland. The Orange Order, an organisation dedicated to defending Protestant interests, began organising small local militias, which by 1913 transformed into the Ulster Volunteer Force, a 100,000 strong militia that vowed to stop Home Rule by force, if necessary.
That's messed up.
Thousands of rifles and millions of rounds of ammunition poured into Ulster. In response, the Nationalists set up the Irish Volunteers, a similar organisation that pledged to defend Home Rule. Nationalists and Unionists were now armed, trained and willing to fight. Unionists put forward an amendment to the Home Rule Bill demanding the exclusion of Ulster from Home Rule. The British Parliament, Unionists and Home Rulers could not agree on Ulster. Civil war was on the horizon. The Home Rule Bill was passed into law in 1914, but the outbreak of the First World War put everything on hold. Civil war was averted by World War. Home Rulers and Unionists went off with the British Army to fight the war, while in Ireland, some nationalists that wanted more than Home Rule thought that this would be the perfect time to push for an Irish Republic. In Easter 1916, they launched a rebellion. They proclaimed an Irish Republic and fought with British soldiers throughout Easter week. This Easter rising was brutally crushed. The execution of the rebel leaders and the mass arrests that took place afterwards seemed to only increase support for a republic. Under Éirinn de Valera, a surviving commander of the Easter Rising, the Sinn Féin party dominated in the 1918 election. Home Rule was dead, and Sinn Féin members refused to take their seats in Westminster. Instead, on the 21st of January 1919, those few elected that weren't already in prison met in Dublin and proclaimed themselves the Parliament or Dáil of the new Irish Republic. This sparked off Ireland's War of Independence.
And it's cool how they're using Irish words, Irish Gaelic words. That's awesome.
A brutal guerrilla war waged by the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, against British forces. To try and fix the situation, the British issued the Government of Ireland Act 1920, which granted Home Rule to Ireland, but instead of one parliament,
too little, too late.
there would be two. One for Northern Ireland, made up of these 6 counties and Ulster, and another for Southern Ireland, which was the rest of the island. This was kind of pointless though, considering how an independent republic had already been declared and nationalists had moved pretty far past Home Rule at this point. But it was here, with this government act, during a war, that the Irish border first appears. A 500-kilometre line that carved part of Ulster and the rest of Ireland apart. The War of Independence ended in 1921 with the Anglo-Irish Treaty. The treaty created an Irish Free State which would be a dominion of the British Empire, similar to Canada. It would have the territory of Southern Ireland but with much more power to govern itself. The Anglo-Irish Treaty was barely passed in the Dáil. Some considered the partition of the island to be unacceptable. The split over the treaty resulted in a civil war between pro and anti-treaty forces. Thousands of Irish people died, many of which had just fought on the same side the previous year. The Civil War ended in 1923 with pro-treaty forces winning, so partition remained. The border had, from the get-go, some glaring problems. For one, the new border was drawn along county lines, regardless of what they crossed, and county borders tended to follow the territories of long-dead chiefs, or rivers. So, towns along rivers found themselves split. Farms and even houses were divided between countries. Some people found that their kitchens were in Ireland, but that they
Kind of a classic British move, unfortunately.
slept in the United Kingdom. Another issue was that Donegal, Cavan
I mean, in India it happened the same way, like Pakistan and India and Bangladesh, so same type of thing, huh?
and Monaghan, the 3 Ulster counties not included in Northern Ireland, had large unionist populations, while in Northern Ireland, Fermanagh and Tyrone had nationalist majorities, while in Derry and Armagh, unionists were barely the majority. Yeah, I guarantee this situation isn't going to cause any troubles. Éirinn de Valera, now in charge of the Irish Free State, pushed for greater independence. He drafted a constitution changing the name of the country to simply Ireland and claimed the entire island as its territory. These moves towards further independence created an economic war with the United Kingdom. Both placed tit-for-tat tariffs on each other's goods. The difference in prices across the border kickstarted a cross-border smuggling extravaganza. Cows, tea, whiskey, flour, eggs and other goods were smuggled across the border and sold wherever they fetched a hire
At least the Irish finally have some control of themselves, though. That's amazing. Being able to actually control your own land is important.
price. Women were the primary smugglers, which created a funny problem. You see, there weren't any women's customs officials. In 1940, a Dundalk police officer wrote, "There is also an urgent need of women searchers. Men searchers are helpless. On several occasions at the trains at Dundalk station, women have told customs men that they have butter and dared them to get it." The world decided to have another war again in 1939 and the British Empire joined in. Ireland remained neutral, but Northern Ireland was fully committed to the war effort. The oddity of one part of an island being at war and another part of the island not created some...
But Ireland remaining neutral, I mean, it's just like, I guess, Switzerland and Sweden. I mean,
bizarre situations.
bit messed up, but okay.
In the village of Petty...
But I mean, Ireland just did get its freedom, so I guess there's some reason it didn't go to, war.
Go on the border, British citizens in the middle of a wartime blackout could, in minutes, sneak over a bridge and suddenly be at peace, while in the same town. In 1949, Ireland declared itself an independent republic, cutting all ties with the British Empire and Commonwealth. Northern Ireland, and thus
cut ties with the Commonwealth,
the United Kingdom, now had a land border with a foreign nation. For people living along the border, it continued to create many inconvenient and outright illogical daily experiences. For example, let's again look at Pettigo. County Donegal was home to most of the village, but the rest was in County Fermanagh. Popping over a bridge to visit a neighbour or go to the local shop meant customs checkpoints. About 400 villagers now had 2 police stations, 2 post offices, and 2 customs posts on each side. On December 21st, 1956, the Northern Irish government responded to the outbreak of an IRA border campaign by issuing orders to block roads crossing the border. British Army soldiers began blowing up border roads and bridges. This caused chaos for border communities. The Fermanagh Herald stated, "Many miles of extra journeys to Mass on Sundays. Nothing will rile up 1950s Irish people quite like disturbing Mass. They loved a good Mass back then." People living on the border,
yeah, much more religious back then, that's for sure,
started to form volunteer road repair groups. In response, British soldiers began to stick spikes and old railway line into the roads to create barricades. This disturbed Mass even more. People were cut off from their own farms, businesses couldn't reach customers, things began to escalate. One event near Eden Tubber saw a crowd of locals gather on a bridge that British soldiers had already planted with explosives, forming a human shield to defend what they saw as a vital part of their community. Soon, British soldiers trying to destroy roads found themselves being fired at by snipers or pelted with rocks by large crowds. By the 1970s, 90% of the border roads had been blocked or blown up. Soldiers, customs officers, and armoured cars guarded the few official crossings. These military checkpoints were soon backed up by watchtowers, barricades, and barbed wire. Customs checkpoints were constantly raided, bombed, and set on fire by the IRA. One customs checkpoint in Bellick was blown up and replaced with a caravan. The caravan had to be replaced 12 times.
Bro, 12 freaking times, damn.
In 2 months.
Only 2 months, damn.
Border communities were plagued with these issues along with the problems within the Northern Irish state itself. Unionists dominated the government by manipulating elections. They drew the electoral boundaries in a way that split Catholic votes. This process is known as gerrymandering. Voting was also
gerrymandering, damn.
tied to property. People that owned multiple properties got multiple votes. In Northern Ireland, Protestants were much more likely to own property. Gerrymandering worked so well that in 1967, Derry elected 12 Unionist councillors compared to 8 nationalist ones, even though Catholic voters outvoted them by 50%. Housing became a massive issue as well. Local councils allotted houses to people in need. As the councils were controlled by Protestants, they tended to grant housing to Protestants, regardless of factors such as family size, need, or positions on the waiting list. Derry City near the border soon became the centre of events. One of the founders of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, Fred Heatley, said, "We had always thought of Derry as the focal point of discrimination. 2/3 of the people voted anti-unionist, but the council was 2/3 unionist because of the ward boundaries. When you spoke to thinking Protestants, they didn't have to be liberal. When the argument came to Derry, they just shrugged their shoulders. There was no case to argue." Tensions, especially in Belfast and Derry, began to rise. The match that set everything off was a unionist march through Derry on the 12th of August 1969. On the day of the march, Protestants and Catholics threw stones and marbles at each other. The police responded to Catholic stone throwing with a baton charge up William Street, kicking off a massive riot, the Battle of the Bogside. The rioting and fighting between the citizens and police forces of Derry continued for days. On the 14th of August, the British Army was sent into Derry and Belfast, which put an end to the rioting. Out of this battle, in August 1969, the Troubles began.
I've heard of the Troubles before.
Petrol bombs, paramilitary groups, and tit-for-tat killings became part of daily life for people in Northern Ireland. In the 30 years of violence that followed, over 3,500 people died. Bombs claimed 30% of the victims. Others were caused by assassinations, arson, beatings, sniper fire, or, in the case of prisoners protesting in the H-block prisons, hunger. This tiny region became the terror capital of Europe. The border continued to be a focus for sectarian violence until the Good Friday Agreement managed to create peace in 1998. This
I've heard of the Good Friday Agreement, yeah.
agreement, along with the UK and Ireland's entry into the European single market 5 years previously, combined to make the border invisible. The barbed wire, the watchtowers and the checkpoints came down. Now you can drive across the border without even knowing, the change of signs in kilometres to miles being your only clue. The Northern Irish peace process ended the Troubles.
All miles per hour instead of kilometers per hour. In the US, I think we generally have both, and of course miles per hour is probably more common, but yeah, generally you might see both on the side.
Military organisations surrendered their weapons. Communities began to come together, and old hatreds started to fade. Now, 30,000 people cross this invisible border every day. Then Brexit happened.
Yep, Brexit.
And that is where this history of the border ends. There are dozens of really good videos on how Brexit will affect the border, so go check them out because this one is already long enough. We'll have to see how Brexit turns out and what effects it will have on the border. But looking at the past, we can see that the effects of a border, especially one as messy as this one, can have unintended consequences. These consequences are dished out from London and Dublin, but are felt in Fermanagh and Derry. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, please leave a comment in the description below. And if you're new here, don't forget to click subscribe and hit the notification bell. All of the sources used are in the description. I would really like to thank my patrons. They make
Alright, thank you so much for watching. And yeah, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let's check out some of the comments. It's weird. The Irish famine is something I learned from such a young age that it never really made an impact on me. It was just a thing that happened. And then after learning about something like Mao's famine or the Holodomor and coming back to the Irish famine, to see a quote blaming the selfish, perverse, and turbulent character of the Irish people. Yikes, Britain. Big yikes. I know, man. That is definitely big yikes. Yeah, suddenly our own Bengal famine of the 40s doesn't seem such a big thing now. It's still pretty big. I mean, it's both awfully terrible. Both are pretty bad, yeah. You are right about how Britain colonialists lied for their empire agendas in China/East Asia and Russia/Eurasia. The old chestnut, the British elite land-owning class, exported the food while they let the Irish starve to death. A more balanced explanation would note the British big farms owning class ran their crop-growing operations on borrowed capital secured by their properties, which was not an uncommon practice by farmers then or now. The grocery stores kept demanding money for the borrowed inventory they had on hand, even from the starving. The potato famine was an unprecedented, huge disaster, and the overall response from social institutions of every kind was found wanting. This is insanely well edited, man. Why is Ireland divided? Because of Britain. I didn't know how I missed this video. Wow, great job. It's sad that at the end, Irish independence came a bit too late for the Irish language. True, it seems. I legit didn't even know Irish was a language until I heard strange, in the good way, unfamiliar sounds coming from Moira in Overwatch. Some people are, fluent in Irish as their first language even, but it is a minority, unfortunately. Irish language has been neglected by Irish people. Only some of us speak it, and the rest either want to, but are too lazy to learn it, or else they dislike the language so much and accuse the Irish speakers of being elitist, snobs, etc. In Ireland, so many people have the mentality that the government should do this or that, when in reality it's not the government's job to teach us our own language. If people really want to learn it, then they would. That is true to an extent, but also, there should definitely be more immersion schools and such to really learn it well and keep it alive and teach everything in Irish from a young age. It was sort of like that in Wales for years until a huge effort by Welsh campaigners, then politicians, then assembly government to teach kids from a very young age to know 16 years of age. Plus the intro of dual language road signs, road markings, etc. Didn't help the Cymraeg was effectively banned throughout the 19th century. Main problem is that the language is very poorly taught in our schools. Instead of starting from the basics like every other language, they start us off with the deep end, expecting us to be already fluent, then act surprised when students give up on the subject because they feel left behind and unable to keep up. Yeah. Alright, you might, let's see. The Éirinn Curtain, congratulations Cogito, you've won the internet. As a non-Irish, wow, this was/is really effed up. I agree, I very much agree. I guess they must have missed the whole love thy neighbor thing in church. Am I the only one to never notice your Irish accent until this video? Like suddenly I heard it and thought, was he always Irish? Why am I only now noticing this? I snuck up on you there. Man, this was amazing though. Very, very much enjoyed it. If you enjoyed my reaction, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and bye bye.